So in this case, how can we link Git and GitHub? Right, to link Git and GitHub, I am going to create a new GitHub repository so that we can see how we can actually use Git and GitHub together. So I am going to assume that you already understand some of the things that are in GitHub. In other words, you are familiar with this interface. So I'm just going to say create new, and in this case, we're going to create a new repository. Right, so in this repository, I'm just going to call it test repo, and I'm going to make it public. And add readme, you don't need to add a readme because it's just a test repository. And then we're just going to create the repository. So a repository, just to explain, it's a folder where you're going to keep your projects. So a repository is just a fancy name to say that it's a folder. So GitHub uses the term repository to say a folder. So when you see something like this, if your repository is like this, after you've created your repository, you will see something like this, most probably. This is an empty repository. Although you have a lot of things that are happening in here, these are just recommendations from GitHub, but this is actually an empty repository. So now that we have a repository, we want to know how we can actually get this repository back to our local PC. If you remember, we created a new folder that we created, and inside the new folder we have folder 1. So what I suggest in this case, especially if you want to link your Git and your GitHub, is to have another folder wherever you like, maybe in your desktop or whatever, or wherever, where you're going to keep all your local repositories. So in this case, we are in the new folder because we are working in the new folder for this tutorial's sake. So I'm going to create a local repository, right? So I'm just going to say make directory and call this local repos or whatever. So local repos. So now we've created a folder called local repos, and when we say ls, we now have folder 1 and local repos. So inside the local repos, that's where we're going to keep the repositories coming from GitHub. So now let us cd inside this local repo. So I'm just going to say lo, and then we're inside local repo. Remember that I click tab so that it auto finishes. So we want to get that repository we just created from GitHub into our local. So how do we do that? We go back to GitHub and we are going to copy this URL. If you don't find this URL, then you can copy the one at the top there, at the bar, at the search bar. So I'm just going to copy this one, and you're going to go back to your terminal. Now this part is very important because this is actually your first git command that we're about to run. So we're going to run a git clone command. So what does git clone do? Git clone actually clones a repository that is from GitHub. So that's like actually copying the whole folder that is in GitHub. So we are going to say git clone and then paste the URL that you got from GitHub. It's going to give you some message saying that it's cloning, and it says warning, you appear to have cloned an empty repository. We know that it is an empty repository, so it's not a problem to us. So the warning is just there because GitHub apparently hates empty things or empty repositories. So we now have this repository. So now let's check if that repository is actually cloned to our laptop. Right, so inside local repos, we should have test repo, which we created on GitHub. So this actually is here. This is our test repo that we have. So we've learned about git clone. We know that git clone actually clones the whole repository, right? So now let's say we wanted to have a simple project that we want to send to GitHub. So I'm just going to simulate a simple project or a simple Python project in this case. So I'm going to create a Python project using the Visual Studio, and we're going to call it test project, like that. Let's say we created a Python project that is just going to print or just hello world, something like that. So hello world, right? And we just leave a line right there. So this is just a simple Python hello world project, and we want to see how we can actually send this to GitHub, because remember, on GitHub the repository is empty, right? So we have this print hello world simple Python, whatever, simple Python project, and I'm going to close this. So inside our local repos, we know that we have test repo. I've just run this ls command. So we're just going to say cd test repo, and we are now inside the test repo. Now let's just check if we have that project we were talking about. So we do have the test project, and the test project seems to be a folder because Visual Studio actually creates a folder for projects that you create. So we're just going to say cd test project, and inside test project you should see a couple of files. For example, test project.py, test project.py project, and the solution file. So now we need to find a way to actually synchronize what we have on our local PC to GitHub. So for example, if you're working with someone, for example, you're working on this Python project with someone else, and they want to see what you're actually working on. For example, they want to add a line onto your project. So using Git and GitHub would actually help in doing that. So now we need to find a way that is going to help us to send this code or this project back to GitHub. So I'm just going to go back and say cd. So we are inside test repo because test repo is our repository. We need to be in our repository. The second git command that you're going to run, that is very important, and you need to run these commands in sequence, in this exact sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to say git add dot. What does this mean? The git add dot command means track all the files that are inside this test repo, because what you've been doing so far, the project that you've created and all the files that have been created, Git was not tracking that. So you need a way to tell Git that, okay, I need you to track these files so that maybe I can save them and then send them back to GitHub. So in this way, we are saying track all the files that are inside this directory. So track all the files that are in this current directory. So the directory happens to be test repo. So we're going to say git add dot, and normally if you don't see any error in the terminal, it just means everything went fine. So let's say git status. So git status will tell you what is actually going on. So we are told that no commits yet, changes to be committed. So these changes are now being tracked. If you see them as green like this, just know that Git is tracking these changes. So if you happen to go and change a line maybe in the project, Git will know that you've changed the line because it's now tracking those files. So, but no commits yet means you have not saved it in terms of Git saving it. Of course, you've saved it like on your PC, in your PC, but Git has not saved those changes. So no commits yet just means that Git has not saved the changes. It is currently tracking the changes, but it has not saved the changes yet. So the next command is git commit, because it's telling you that no commit and no commits yet. So the next command is git commit -m, and inside the codes, that's where we write what we call a commit message. What is a commit message? Right, so let's say you're working with someone and maybe it's a large project. You want to let them know what you actually did on the project. For example, we added a line or we created a Python project. So someone would want to know what this person did on this code. So that's where you actually leave a message. So it's more like a small message that you leave so that other people know. It's more like a comment actually. So it's a small message. So in this case, we're going to say added a new Python project, like that. So just a small message so that the other person who you are working with can know, or yourself in the future can know what you did on the project. So git commit added a new Python project. So we want to commit these changes, right? So we're going to click enter, and then now it's going to say 7 files changed, 131 insertions. Remember that, you know, there were a lot of files. Visual Studio creates a lot of files, right? So we've committed our changes, and now we want a way to send those changes to GitHub. And it turns out there is another Git command that we're going to run, and that command is called Git. We are done with whatever we were working on the project, and we want to push those changes back to GitHub, right? So we're just going to say Git push. And after pushing our changes, in this case there were no errors. That means everything is fine. And it also tells us that, okay, it pushed our changes to this repository, the test.repo git. Remember the URL that we copied that other side? So it pushed all those changes back to that repository. So now when we go back to GitHub, we need to see the file or the project that we just created or that we just pushed to GitHub. So now let's go back to GitHub. Right, let's refresh the page. Right, so as you can see that now the project that we pushed from our local PC has been posted also on GitHub. And then if we want to check it, so you see that we have this folder and these files. Let's open up testproject.py, and then you see that we have print hello world, right? So now let's say we want to edit this file, and so that we can take the edited version back to our local PC. So let me just add a line and say, let me just say print hi or something, parentheses. Right, so we added the line, and the project that we have on our local PC does not know about this change. So how can we let our PC know that, okay, we've made a change to the file that is on GitHub? So we're just going to commit the changes. Remember, committing changes just means saving the file or the changes actually. So we've committed our changes. Now, those changes that have been made on GitHub, they are unknown to our local PC. How can we prove that? Well, let's say cd test project, and we want to open up the test project that we have, the test.py project. And then you'll see that the project still has one line in this case, because GitHub has not let our local PC know about the changes. So how can we make sure that this file is updated using the information from GitHub? So in this case, I'm going to close this. Right, so inside the test project, we need to go back to test repo, because that's where that .git folder is. So I'm just going to say cd, go back, and we're now in test repo. So if we want to get the changes from GitHub back to our local PC, we are going to say git pull, because git push sends the changes back to GitHub. Git pull sends the changes from GitHub to our local PC. So git pull should tell us that there were some changes. In this case, the 1+ or 1 insertion just means that one line was inserted, and we know what that line is, right? In other words, now that those changes have been updated on our local PC, we should see that line when we open up our project. So I'm just going to say cd test project, and let's say code testproject.py. We should be able to see that second line now, print hi, without actually copying and pasting it from that other side. So this is how you actually use Git and GitHub to actually work together and also work with other people. So for example, if someone had made a change on your project online and you pulled the changes, you'll see that this person changed this and this. So that's it on Git and GitHub. If there's something that I left and you'd want clarity on, just leave a comment down below and I will get to it. I hope this video was helpful in introducing you to Git and GitHub.